I woke the way I always woke, which is to say without the seem that should come before waking. There was no drifting up out of sleep, no slow assembly of the room around me. One instant there was nothing, and the next instant there was the white deck and the white light and my own hands lying open in my lap, and I was already sitting upright on the bench as if I had been placed there by someone careful. The light came from everywhere and from nowhere. It had no source you could point to. It fell on the long pale floor and the long pale walls and left no shadow under anything, not under the bench, not under my boots, not under my own jaw when I tipped my head down to look at myself. A room with no shadows is a room that does not feel real, and I had learned, though I did not yet know I had learned it, to distrust the way it did not feel real. I knew my name. Merritt Vance, deck engineer, second of the survey tender that had gone quiet near the cold star. I knew the shape of my hands and the ache in my lower back from too many years bent under conduit. I knew the taste in my mouth, flat and metallic like I had bitten a coin. What I did not know was how long I had been sitting on the bench, or how I had come to the bench, or what had happened to the survey tender after the quiet. Those things were not in me. Where they should have been there was a smoothness, the way a river stone is smooth, worn down past the point where you can find any grain. Across the deck, behind a wall that was not glass but behaved like glass, the Tessini watched me. I will tell you about the Tessini, because you have likely never seen one and likely never will, and because what they were is part of what they did. They were tall and narrow, and they moved as though the air around them were thicker than the air around us, slowly, with a kind of deliberation that I came to understand was not patience but a property of their bodies, the same way water is wet. Their skin was the gray of wet ash, and it held the white light without giving any of it back. They had long faces, and their eyes were set close and high, and they did not blink, because they had nothing to blink with. When they looked at you, you felt looked at the way a specimen feels looked at, if a specimen could feel. There was one of them who came closest to the wall that behaved like glass, and stood there, and regarded me. I did not have a name for it. I would learn that the others called it by a sound I could not make with my throat, and that the closest I could come to it was warden, and so warden is what I called it in my head, where I kept the few things that were mine. The warden spoke. It did not speak with a mouth. The words arrived in the room the way the light arrived, from everywhere and from nowhere in my own language, flattened of all the things that make a voice a voice. You are comfortable, it said. It was not a question. I'm sitting on a metal bench in a room with no clock, I said. Comfortable isn't the word. You will be returned to your kind, it said. When we have understood you, this is not punishment. Understand that. We do not punish. We catalog. I had nothing to say to that, and so I said nothing, and the warden seemed content with the nothing. It told me, in its flat from everywhere voice, that it would ask me questions, and that I should answer them truthfully, and that whether I answered them truthfully or not made very little difference in the end, because they had a way of arriving at the truth that did not depend on me. It said this last part without any cruelty in it. That was the thing about the Tessini that took me the longest to understand. There was no cruelty in them. Cruelty requires that you hold the other thing's pain as real and choose it anyway. They did not hold our pain as real. They held our pain the way you hold the reading on an instrument as data, as a number that goes up or down. The questions were small. Where had the survey tender been bound? How many were aboard? What did we know of the cold star and the things that had been built near it? I answered some and not others, and the room did not change and the light did not change, and after a while the warden said, "That is enough for now," and the white came up so bright that it ate the room, and then there was nothing again. And then I woke, sitting upright on the bench, my hands open in my lap, the coin taste in my mouth. I did not know it was the second time. To me it was the first. To me it was always the first. That is what the fold did. I did not have the word for it yet, the word fold, but I will use it now so that you understand what was being done to me, because I want you to understand it the way I came to understand it, which was slowly, against the grain, with no help from my own memory. The Tessenai had built a way of taking an hour and closing it over on itself, the way you close a page over your thumb to mark your place, except that when they opened the page again the hour began fresh and you began fresh inside it, the river stone smooth, the grain worn away. They did this not to torture but to learn. Each time they folded the hour they asked their small questions a little differently and watched how the answers moved. And the answers could not lie to them across many foldings, because I did not know I was being asked again. And so each answer was an honest first answer, and 100 honest first answers laid side by side will give up the truth that a single careful liar can keep. It was, I will admit, a clean and terrible kind of brilliance. They did not need to hurt me. They needed only to ask me the same thing 1,000 times and let me forget the 1,000. I do not know how many times the hour folded before the thing happened that I am going to tell you about. I have a guess, and the guess is written in metal, and I will come to that. But for a long stretch of foldings I was, as far as I knew, a woman who had been sitting on a bench for a few minutes, answering a few questions, in a room with no shadows and no clock. The thing that saved me was an ache. When I woke, every time, my hands lay open in my lap. And every time before the warden spoke, before I had collected even the smallness of myself, there was an ache in the pad of my right thumb, a specific ache, not a throb, not a sting, but the deep dull soreness of a muscle that has done the same hard small thing too many times. The kind of soreness a man gets in the web of his hand from gripping a wrench wrong all shift. I noticed it the way you notice a stone in your boot, which is to say I noticed it without thinking about it, and pushed it down below thinking, and answered the warden's questions. But the body keeps its own counsel. The mind can be wiped smooth as a river stone, and the body will still flinch from the stove it does not remember being burned by. My thumb was sore. And the soreness did not belong to a woman who had been sitting still on a bench for a few minutes, and somewhere underneath the smoothness, some part of me that the fold could not reach all the way down to began, very quietly, to wonder why. So one time, I cannot tell you which time, the 100th or the 400th, it is all the first time to me, I woke with the sore thumb, and instead of pushing the wondering down below thinking, I let it sit. I kept my hands open in my lap. I did not look at the warden. I turned my right hand over slowly, the way you turn over a card you are afraid of, and I looked at the pad of my thumb. The nail was worn down past the quick on the inner corner, filed flat and a little bloodied, the way a nail gets not from biting but from scraping it against something hard, over and over with force. I looked at the bench I was sitting on. It was a single piece of the pale, soft alloy that everything on that deck was made of, a metal too soft to be good for anything that mattered, the kind of metal you would never build a hull from because a fingernail could mark it. A fingernail could mark it. I leaned forward and I ran my sore thumb along the underside of the bench's front rail, the lip of it where my hand would naturally fall if I sat and let my arm hang, and I felt them before I saw them. A row of small ridges, a line of them close together regular, each one a shallow crescent the exact width and curve of a thumbnail. My thumbnail. I bent down under the white shadowless light, far enough that the warden surely saw me bend, and I looked at the underside of the rail and there they were. Tally marks. Not the four-end-slash kind. There had been no thought of legibility, no design, just the same gouge made again and again in the soft metal, each one crescent-shaped, each one overlapping the last a little so that the row of them looked, at a glance, like the worn edge of a coin or the chatter a dull tool leaves in aluminum. But they were not chatter. They were too even for chatter. Each one was a separate act. Each one was a thumbnail driven into soft metal by a hand that meant it. I knew, the way you know a thing in your body before your mind agrees to it, that I had made them. That some earlier me, some me from before the riverstone smoothing, had sat exactly here on exactly this bench and had reached down with exactly this thumb and had cut one mark into the rail, and then had been folded back to nothing, and had woken and not remembered, and somehow, had found the marks again and understood and added one. I sat there under the white light with my sore thumb against the metal, and I did the only sane thing a person can do when she finds a message left for her by a self she cannot remember. I counted. I counted them with the pad of my thumb, because counting them with my eyes meant bending where the warden could see my eyes move, and I did not yet want the warden to know what I had found. I ran my thumb along the row, click by click, ridge by ridge, the way you count change in your pocket without looking. It took a long time. The marks were small and close, and my count slipped twice, and I started over twice, patient, the way you are patient with a thing that matters more than your comfort. There were a great many of them. I will not give you the false number my hands first reported, because I miscounted, and because the true number came later and is the number that matters. But it was a great many. It was a row of them as long as my hand, and then half again as long. A row that had taken some woman a long, long time to make. One fold at a time, one mark at a time. Each mark the entire memory of a life that had been taken from her, set down in metal because metal does not forget. I understood then what I was looking at. I was looking at the only thing on that deck the fold could not reach. The warden could close the hour over on itself. It could wipe the inside of my skull smooth. It could take the survey tender and the cold star and the faces of my crew and the sound of my own mother's voice and grind them all down past the point of grain. But it could not reach into the metal of the bench and lift out the marks. The fold reset the hour. It did not reset the room. Why would it? The room was furniture. The room was the cage, not the prisoner. They had never thought to reset the cage, because nothing in the cage was supposed to be able to write. I had been writing. "Your hands are busy," the warden said, from everywhere, from nowhere. It had been watching me bend and count. Of course it had. What do you do beneath the rail? And here is the thing I want you to hold on to, because it is the whole of it. It is the entire heart of what a person is when everything else has been taken. I did not panic. I did not snatch my hand back. I had just learned that I was perhaps the 400th iteration of a woman who had sat on this bench and been emptied out and had still, every single time, found her way back to the marks and added one. 400 women, all of them me, all of them waking smooth and afraid and alone, all of them refusing. You do not panic in the company of 400 women like that. You straighten up. You keep your hand where it is. You answer plainly. "I'm counting," I said. "Counting what?" "The number of times you've done this to me," I said. "I don't remember any of them, but I wrote them down where you can't take them." The warden was silent, not the silence of a thing deciding what to say. The silence of a thing that has encountered a reading on an instrument it did not expect, a needle that has gone past the end of the dial. I sat very still, and I held my sore thumb against the long row of marks my forgotten selves had left for me. And for the first time since I had woken on that bench in that shadowless light, I was not alone in the room. I had 400 of myself behind me, and every one of them had known something the warden was only now beginning to learn, which was that you can take an hour from a human being, and you can take her memory, and you can take her crew and her ship and her past, and the smell of the rain on the world where she was born, and she will reach down with the one tool you cannot confiscate, the nail on the end of her own thumb, and she will keep the count. "That mark accomplishes nothing," the warden said at last. "You will not remember making it." "No," I agreed, "but she will." I touched the next clean stretch of rail, the bare metal past the end of the row where the next mark would go. "Whoever I am next time, she'll find it, she always does." The white came up then, brighter than I had ever felt it, so bright it had a sound, and I understood in the last sliver of that hour that the warden had folded the page early before its questions, to take this from me, to wipe out the woman who had said she always does. And in that same last sliver, with the white eating the room and eating my hands and eating the thought I was thinking, I bent my thumb to the bare metal past the end of the row, and I cut one more mark, and I felt it bite, and then there was nothing. And then I woke, sitting upright on the bench, my hands open in my lap, the coin taste in my mouth, and a deep, dull soreness in the pad of my right thumb.